Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is March 20, 2024. We are recording S4A live stream number 114. I'm joined at twitch.tv/socialisms4a by 40 viewers in the chat who are going to be contributing to the stream and helping to make it what it is. I have a lot of articles pulled, but we do a lot of chat and people suggest different ideas and ask questions, and that makes for a lot of great content and just educational opportunities here. That's what this is all about. Agitate, educate, and then organize. The organizing is going to happen off stream, but that's where you come in. Take what you've learned online, bring it into your local left. If you're in a city, there's probably going to be some amount of left groups, organizations, and coalitions that you can get involved in, and give your input on those, let people get to know you, see what's going on. If you're not in a city, you might have to join something on more of a county-wide, statewide, or national basis, but there should still be some opportunities for you to get involved in something, or if you network with some other people and meet people, you might be able to start something up. So I guess while we're doing our sort of PSA type stuff, before we get into initial chat or what's going on in the stream today, let's thank the patrons and the Buy Me a Coffee supporters whose names are on the screen. I want to also thank Redacted Thought at the $10 level, whose name I haven't been able to put on the screen yet into the graphic. Patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall are the places you can go, get your name on the screen, kick in a few dollars a month or more, whatever you see fit. This support is vital for me to be able to keep spending the hours month to month, whether that's planning content, researching content, actually recording the content, then editing, posting it up, promoting it, replying to questions, all of that kind of stuff. I like doing it. It's helping me. It seems to be helping a lot of other people too. But we are non-commercial. We don't run ads. We don't do sponsorships. It's just viewer supported. So again, patreon.com/socialismforall, buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. Either one, you can do a recurring contribution that'll bill you monthly, or on Buy Me a Coffee, you can just do a one-time. So either way, everything helps, everything's encouraging, and it lets me spend more time on this. I see how much I got at the beginning of the month, and then I look how much time can I spend. The bigger that number is, the more time I can spend. So in a way, it's like you're employing me to do this channel with those contributions. So the more it is going up, the more that I can add. I really, I was debating whether I was going to announce this. We were just talking about the Cooking with S4A feature that I've been wanting to do. I started doing some research for Cooking with S4A number 1. I'm going to hold myself to it. We'll do the first Cooking with S4A sometime in April. I don't know when, but I can at least hold myself to that. We'll do at least, one in April, and we'll see how it goes. I don't know how often I'm going to be able to do it, but we'll do a Cooking with S4A, the first one, number 1, in April 2024. So, like I said, more contributions, more time. I think that there's probably a certain point after which I wouldn't want to spend every single day doing this, just for my own sanity, but anyway, it really does help. So thanks to the patrons, thanks to the Buy Me a Coffee supporters, and thanks also to the people who maybe were supporters at one time, aren't anymore, but have stayed in touch and send in articles and reading ideas and different things. That's another kind of contribution that I find helpful. It's always good to know that, there's people out there who actually support learning this the right way. There's a lot of kind of bastardizations and distortions of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism going around. Really, there's no shortage of it. There's tons and tons of channels which are basically right-wingers calling themselves communists and using a little bit of communist language or imagery or whatever, and then just distorting the hell out of, people's understanding of Marxism, because we don't have a strong tradition of Marxism on a really mass basis in the U.S. So it's easy for them to come in and put out a distortion and then to confuse people because they don't really know. Because again, there's not that kind of history of like, somebody being taught by their parent or grandparent, and then they can come up and look at these revisionists and just basically fascists in red garb and say, oh, that isn't Marxism. My grandfather or my grandmother taught me what Marxism is, and that isn't it. People don't know. They're trying to learn this. After 2008, people really just started talking about capitalism again in the U.S., and they're trying to learn Marxism. It's a position of vulnerability. A lot of these fascists are taking advantage of that. So anyway, it's always nice to find people who also reject that. Because when I got into this in 2020 and started doing this channel, I couldn't believe, my head was spinning from just how many people were doing fake Marxism out there. It was crazy. And this isn't just like, oh, I'm just gatekeeping my own personal opinion. No, they're doing time-tested distortions of Marxism that have been, commented on for centuries, and really, really well-known pieces of revisionism still being circulated. So it's always good to be in contact with people, whether you're a patron or not, who knows what's up and is willing to help fight that, as we're trying to do here. So there we go. We'll shout out to the community. I would say the S4A community. I mean, and that's to some extent a thing, but to a broader extent, just the anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist community out there, which I'm happy and grateful to be part of. So what's coming up on the stream today? Well, basically, we streamed on Monday. That was a makeup for, I had something come up last Thursday, so we streamed Monday. And then today's Wednesday. I think I have something tomorrow again, so I just wanted to make sure to stream today, and that's why we're streaming today. And we are posting clips from the streams. We will eventually post the whole live stream, 113, 114, etc. But I'll be posting clips first, as I was just telling the chat. I've been posting clips today from live stream 113. I probably won't post the entire stream 113 until sometime next week, but there will definitely be a bunch of clips up by the weekend, and then same thing with this 114. We'll post the whole thing at some point, but before the whole thing is posted, you'll see clips trickling out. So as far as what I want to cover today, there's a few odds and ends. I want to talk about the U.S. economy. We seem to be coming up on a major 2008 type event again, as I've been covering for the last few months. And I wanted to do some articles talking about that, various bellwethers of a worsening economy and probably a massive downturn. We'll look at some of the evidence of that. I also want to talk about some things related to the military and how the U.S. military recruits people through video games targeting teenagers. Also talking about how the U.S., a lot was made of Trump's Space Force, that the military was expanding more overtly into space. That really wasn't a new thing with Trump. If you go back to the George W. Bush and Dick Cheney administration that no one wants to talk about from 2001 to 2009, that crucially set the tone for what has been happening really ever since. And like I said, no one really talks about it. They need to be discussed more. What we should understand is that the tone that their administration set has been constant ever since, because it served larger purposes for U.S. and global capitalism beyond what happens during a single 8-year period. They made major, major changes, starting the war on terror and the police state that goes along with that in the name of, quote, fighting terrorism. And that wasn't just a U.S. thing. All of the other big imperialist countries basically had a similar type of effort, transforming their police and surveillance systems under the name of anti-terrorism. So we'll get into the tie-ins of militarizing space, going back to a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, which came out of the Project for the New American Century think tank, which had very close and extensive ties to the George W. Bush administration. Then finally, I'd like to conclude today, at least for the articles and presentation portion, talking about, there's an article that a viewer sent in about Henry Kissinger, the man, the myth, the war criminal. And when we're talking about U.S. militarism, which is basically the military arm of global imperialism, all the imperialist countries, well, they do have rivalries and contradictions within the imperialist bloc, if you will. They're all basically on the same page as far as having shared interests to a great extent. And the U.S. within that bloc basically serves as the military arm, or, like the muscle for global imperialism. So when we talk about that, looking at the role of Henry Kissinger, an imperial theorist who was behind so many different incursions, putting down left-wing uprisings all over the world, and just advancing a deeply right-wing imperialist agenda, obviously most connected with the U.S., but tied to the rest of the imperialist system as well, which is interconnected and interlocking. It is a system as well as the highest stage of capitalism. So we will look at Kissinger there and the many pies that he has had his fingers in. But let's see what's been going on in the chat to start us off. 45 people in the chat right now. So yeah, people saying bonus stream this week. I mean, really the Monday stream was last week's stream. So, but yeah, I have a ton of articles. I'm finding that Blue Sky is a much better place for me to gather news from than was Twitter. I've officially closed all Twitter tabs at this point. Still stick my nose in there once in a while to just see certain things if I hear that something is going on, particularly on that site. But generally, it's not a good place. It was stressing me the hell out just trying to get news off of it even. And I'm finding that the news is of higher quality and much less stress attached to it on Blue Sky. So I've been pulling a lot of articles and shaping up segments for the streams. And I just want to keep up with it because even after this, I already have an additional 1 to probably 2 streams worth. So I don't want to let that slack. It is a lot of work pulling the articles, shaping it into a program, and then also doing the stream and then editing it. So that's a lot of my time budget for the channel. You might see when I'm doing more streaming there's some fewer audiobooks, but actually that said, when we get back into the audiobooks, which I just posted one on Friday, I don't think that there's going to be an audiobook this week. But what we're doing is the First Wave USA Anti-Revisionism playlist, which concerns Browderism. So Earl Browder was the General Secretary of CPUSA back before World War II, and really an excellent Marxist. It's kind of like with Kautsky, where Lenin called him a renegade because he was such a good Marxist, and then he went completely opportunist later, and it was just you were so good, what happened? And so this is how far we are into the anti-Browderism playlist, showing that in the 20s and 30s, Browder was super solid. It makes sense that he became General Secretary of CPUSA back when CPUSA, was before it became so debased. And then the next thing that we're going to read is Browder's work from the early 40s about the Tehran Conference and how the U.S. and the U.K. were going to start respecting the USSR and making all these predictions for after World War II that they were just going to let the USSR exist in peace and all this kind of stuff. That was one of the main errors. There were also others which are discussed in the foreword to Marxism, Leninism versus Revisionism by Max Weiss there on the playlist. But that's where the turn happens, is during World War II in the early 40s. Just goes to show, Marxism is a science. It's a set of analytical tools. It's proletarian revolutionary sociology. It is, tools for analyzing society according to dialectical materialism, which when we apply it to historical development, we call historical materialism. But it's a way of doing analysis, and it is social science. It's not that you can just follow one person who has been good in the past and they're guaranteed to be good in the future. People start being revisionist, which in a Marxist sense means you're revising core theses of Marxism with bourgeois or capitalist ideas. So if Marxism represents the proletarian class interests and is proletarian revolutionary ideology, you need to keep that intact and keep the capitalist ideas out. We call it revisionism when bourgeois ideas enter Marxism and start replacing, key tenets of Marxism, what's been established as demonstrable principles of historical development and class struggle. So, Browder was good, he became bad, gotta just accept it and move forward with the rest of people who can actually apply dialectical materialism correctly to, continually unfolding historical situations. So let's get back into the chat there. Get the screen back up. I'm reading Our Enemies in Blue, a book I've recommended, after listening to S4A suggest it in a reading from the Anti-Revisionism playlist. When he's reading one great book, he's suggesting even another great book. Yeah, that was in part of my radical education. That was a book I read almost 20 years ago. And that's by a guy, I want to say his name is Christian Williams, who was involved in Rose City Cop Watch, police watchdog group, basically. And it's a history of policing in the U.S., which has always been partisan. I mean, more partisan than it's considered today. It used to be really overtly partisan, and it kind of just discusses the political development of policing as an institution in the U.S. and what are its purposes. Like, for example, where the state police came from in a lot of areas was when the big strikes were happening around the turn of the century, and there weren't state police yet. A lot of the cops would refuse to go out there and shoot the strikers because they'd have family that was, working in the mines or wherever. So the capitalists realized, hey, we need to defeat that sort of personal loyalty somehow. And so they came up with state police as an institution that they could move around the state so that, the people that they would be policing, even, when they went up for completely just reasons like, they were striking to protest living conditions, working conditions, and so on, they would be less personally connected to them and more likely to just enforce the capitalists' will. So all kinds of interesting stuff coming out of that. Also, the thing about cops and Klan go hand in hand, the overlap between police, working as a police officer and being in the Ku Klux Klan, that is really historical fact. Of course, after World War II, just as the left was cracked down on, COINTELPRO also targeted the far right. And this was in the name of kind of class peace. The U.S. government was trying to, quote, crack down on extremism. Of course, when push comes to shove, they'll always let the right wing back in first because they support capitalism. And that serves a purpose for the system. So anyway, before more of the crackdown on the KKK, now making, a resurgence, and also neo-Nazism in other forms is making a resurgence now as capitalism goes into crisis. But before all of that, back in the 30s and whatnot, the KKK police overlap was enormous. So, it would be hood by night and badge by day. But yeah, interesting book. A bit dry, I found, but very interesting. So another comment, I think that the lack of information about COVID from the government boils down to the fact that the prevention of chronic illnesses, mostly those that affect people past their retirement or working life, isn't profitable either for the healthcare system or for industry. For the healthcare system, because more patients means more money, and for industry, because chronic illnesses manifest past retirement after they're relying on people to multiply their capital working for them. Apparently, the deprogrammed guys, Hakim, Second Thought, and Ugopnik, have been catching some flack lately because they paywalled a, quote, educational episode. Simple solution to that, don't paywall anything. Then they were very wishy-washy, promising not to paywall educational content, quote, whenever possible. Like I said, there's a very simple solution to that. They seem like leftist-flavored entertainment, good entry point for some, myself included, but I've long since moved on. Haven't listened in half a year or more. They seem more interested in being podcasters and YouTubers, sort of like, online e-celebs or personalities than doing the hard-hitting content. And that's, I was saying in the last stream talking about this, it's like Jimmy Dore, after breaking away from TYT over the Hillary Clinton issue, whereas Jimmy Dore was a Bernie supporter in 2016, and actually sounded progressive at that time. This is before he started doing the right-wing grift. And why did he do it? Because you can't build a huge channel just speaking to a left audience, because we do need things that are just for a left audience and to build that left audience, and that really holds the line against liberalism. But if you want to be a gazillionaire and get tons of clout and tons of clicks and, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of subscribers, that's just not in the cards in the 2020s or late 2010s for that. The only way you can get those numbers and the clicks and the ad revenue is by going to a much bigger audience, and whether that's, garden variety liberals that you want to teach a couple of, communist terms to, or whether you want to go the Jimmy Dore route and start pandering to libertarians and MAGA. But this is the thing, holding to movement building politics that actually educates people and sticks to some kind of principles and doesn't just water everything down. Making it accessible is one thing, but just watering it down and replacing and revising true positions with things that just basically are liberalism, the thing that we're trying to get away from. That doesn't really help anyone, but it will help a podcaster if they're just trying to get their numbers and their ad revenue up. So, there's a difference. Learn it and judge people accordingly. Others continue 100%. It's a shame. I used to really enjoy Hakim's short video essays. That breadtube money is just too alluring, I guess. The deprogram guys said that they won't do that again, but it's still fucked up. Yep. A new communist party was launched in Canada. Apparently, it's the Revolutionary Communist Party. I don't know how it relates to the original Communist Party of Canada. They run Marxist.ca website. That sounds Trotskyist to me. But I'm not... Oh, the Marxist Winter School. Aren't those Trotskyists? I'm pretty sure that those are Trotskyists. Somebody correct me if not. But it's ringing a faint bell of like an account I interacted with maybe once on social media. Yeah, so somebody else says, isn't that just IMT Trotskyites rebranding? Right, yeah, somebody else says, I used to subscribe to Marxist.ca, Socialist Fight Back. Okay, yeah. Who apparently were not good on COVID. So yeah, pretty sure those are Trotskyists. Red Menace just released an episode on Marx's 18th Brumaire. Pretty good listen. I'm sad Brett is leaving Guerrilla History, but happy that Red Menace will be posting more frequently. I don't really know either of them, but good. I'm glad that that's good. If you give me a link, I'll check it out. Idea for cooking with S4A, lentil quinoa stuffed bell peppers. The key is cooking lentils and the grain in veggie broth. I almost never use vegetable broth because I use a lot of herbs and spices, which give it plenty of flavor anyway. So that for me is kind of the key. I just use lots of herbs and spices. And then the whole veggie broth process, either buying it and then you're dealing with all the packaging and the plastic, or making it. I mean, I compost, so my scraps don't go to waste anyway. And plus I have really minimal scraps in the first place. But yeah, I don't do really any veggie broth. To me, it's just so much work and such an extra step that I don't need. And again, it's because of I use a lot of herbs and spices, so you get plenty of flavor that way, and much less work than doing veggie broth, in my opinion. Oh, okay, and that is correct about Marxist.ca. It is IMT, Trotskyite rebranding. My childhood friend, probably former friend now, got recruited from the military because he plays a lot of shooting games, and the military propaganda got him to join the military. He could also have been recruited from school too, since the military does that. Military recruiters have got to be some of the scummiest pieces of the imperial machine. Someone adds, yes, they are. Lying to kids to get them to participate in extreme violence. Yes, kill and die for corporate empire. Sell your soul for corporate profits. Why not? Why not? Get blown up, hurt other people, watch fellow soldiers sexually assault civilians, like you name it. And why? Because, you got tricked by the country that you were raised to trust, and nobody got to you before you signed that dotted line. So yeah, counter recruitment work is, if that's something that speaks to you, highly encourage you look up counter recruitment work. It needs to be done to count. The military recruiters, they will lie to kids, and also take advantage of the fact that the U.S. doesn't have free college, doesn't have universal health care, etc. U.S. working class pretty vulnerable, and then also it's just hard to find a job. So for people who don't know what the U.S. military is really all about and don't know that the U.S. really is, as evil as it is, as oppressive and exploiting as it is, which not everybody is grown up being taught that. When you go to, you're approached by a military recruiter, they don't hand you Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and say, here, read this first, and if you still think joining the U.S. military is a good idea, then we'll be here. No, they use every pressure tactic under the sun, and the U.S. raises a lot of people in extreme ignorance. Now, there's some people that really are right-wing, and they join the military knowing what it is, but that's really not always the case, to say the least. And military recruiters will, it's just part of the exploitation machine. And then, they bring people in and they're getting people to kill, and a lot of people die in the process, or they're so horribly traumatized after the fact that, and let alone the damage that they've done. It's just horrible. It's just multiplying the violence that is capitalism, and terrible, terrible thing. And we need to be turning more would-be military recruits as well as ex-military into actual communists. Not this kind of bastardized conservative Marxist hybrid that seems to be all the rage right now, which I hope is just a developmental phase as Americans start overcoming their fascist brainwashing that they're, brought up with. And they haven't left all of it behind, but they're starting to embrace a Marxist outlook, but they still have these vestiges. You got to leave all of it behind, and we as educators and agitators need to be assisting people with that process. I mean, some of them are just going to fight us on it, and you got to pick your battles. But that does seem to be a developmental stage in the U.S. developing a left at this point, is overcoming that kind of conservative stuff. And there's tons of people that don't question their socialization and their assumptions that they've been taught about the way that the world works and society and races and sexes and genders and just everything else about society. They won't question it deeply enough, and then they bring all this bigotry into the would-be communist movement. They're just basically making fascism. So anyway, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Counter-recruitment is one facet of it. Anyway, we'll talk about that more when we get into that those articles. Blue Sky social media is a lot busier now that they dropped the invite code requirement. Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot more liberals, like as in Democrats, on the site. I'm tempted to do that. The CPUSA, we are small d Democrats thing. CPUSA social media stop embarrassing yourselves challenge, impossible. But big D Democrats, so to speak, flooding Blue Sky. It's pretty annoying. That said, there's still tons and tons of actually good radical Blue Sky users. And I got to say also, here's a call out for many of the accounts who I followed on Twitter and who do good posts on Twitter and are, good sort of Twitter warriors, as it were, made accounts on Blue Sky and then haven't touched them in 5 or 6 months because you're still using Elon's Nazi site. Stop. Get off the Nazi site, okay? Stop making Elon Musk more money. And just stop legitimizing that site, okay? Get off of Twitter. And so all these people were like, oh, we're going to use Blue Sky. And then, I'd say 4/5 of them are still over on Twitter. So congrats to the people, myself included, who left that behind. You don't have to delete your account, but stop using the site and move over somewhere else instead, and we can keep the conversations going and we can keep building that education over there. Speaking of Twitter, actually, so Musk has been talking about a paywall for some time. I actually saw some people circulating screenshots of actual instances where there are posts that now if you don't subscribe to Twitter Blue, you can't read them. It'll say like sign up for premium to see more. It'll show the first few lines of somebody's tweet, and then it starts fading out, and it's like log into premium to read this post. Oh my God, no one is going to do that. I mean, the people who are going to do that are just far right people, basically, and that's what that site is becoming. Get off of it now. Start building your presence somewhere else. And actually, so I mentioned this in the last stream because somebody reminded me. I got a few screenshots. But so for people who know, Stonetoss is a neo-Nazi cartoonist. You can see the style up on the right side where it says, "Hey, accept my body," as well as in the middle there. So neo-Nazi cartoons that address many, many issues, social topics, from a far-right perspective. This person was outed recently as Hans Christian Graebener of Spring, Texas. And Elon Musk was protecting Stonetoss. So this is some of what was going on Twitter. So this is Hannah Gaius, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Twitter, or whatever you want to call it, locked my account. This is last week, I think on the 15th. For a now deleted post from a member of the Anonymous Comrades Collective who has since been suspended. The post had the name and city, not the address, not the license plate, but just the name and city of the neo-Nazi cartoonist known as Stonetoss. Twitter says it's doxing. It isn't by their own rules, and here's why. And so they do a thread basically explaining Twitter rules explicitly say that a name is not violating that. So it says Twitter has a long list of what violates its policy for posting private information. It includes the home address or physical location information, street addresses, GPS, it's very specific. But posting the general location of a user, like the city they live in, is what the tweet that I shared did. It is not specific location information. Furthermore, Stonetoss has close to 500,000 followers. As a result, see the second screenshot, he is what would constitute a public figure. So there you go. And they continue. I've known people who are actually doxxed on the platform. Some of those posts weren't taken down. What's different? So Stonetoss went whining to Elon Musk and saying that they're not going to be intimidated, but on behalf of other people who might be intimidated, you need to do something about this right away. And Musk went on to say that, some people would lose their employment or worse. I mean, for being a Nazi, I hope so. And why are you protecting that? But that's what Elon Musk's site is about, okay? It is a safe haven for Nazis, period. And not by accident, on purpose. Anyway, there's another user saying there, same thing just happened to me. I mentioned name and state, not city. And their account was put on hold. People were reporting this several days ago. People were reporting this. I guess it got straightened out because now you can see people, talking about it and able to post the name. But when this came out, that was being protected, and I don't know to what extent it still is. But yet another reason, all these people that were like, "Oh, I'm getting off of Twitter," then actually do it. Get off. I can see you, and I see that you haven't touched your account in half a year. So, okay. That just kind of drives me crazy because the rest of us are waiting for you on other sites. If you just are so addicted to that Twitter engagement, that's a you problem. But you're aiding Nazis, so please stop. Anyway, as far as odds and ends, there was another. This doesn't really tie into any other bigger feature that I had, but I wanted to share this. As far as climate change goes, one of the many topics that is not being dealt with appropriately. We're still, happy spring, by the way, one day early, I guess. We're still in the cusp of winter and spring, but it's already an unseasonably warm year. It is an El Nino year, so that's somewhat typical, but it keeps trending up. This is beyond just El Nino. It is a climatic shift. What this summer has in store, more droughts, more wildfires, who knows? But this was an interesting story that was circulating. This is from the 13th, so a week ago. Swept away. $500,000 sand dune built to protect U.S. homes disappears in days. So this is a coastal town in Massachusetts that was home to some wealthy people north of Boston. Salisbury is the name of the town. So basically, these were some expensive houses that were beachfront, and the ocean has been rising. Cue the Ben Shapiro thing about like, well, I assume then those people would just sell their houses, but one problem, Ben, to who's going to buy them, fucking Aquaman. So, yeah, I mean, that's just a house that is underwater is a house that is not worth anything. Okay, so who are you going to sell that to? I think the fish don't have that much money. But anyway, so they build a $500,000 sand dune because there was like a storm hitting. And so they dumped 15,000 tons of sand to try to protect the houses. And it was swept away in 72 hours. So, 3 days later, the storm just washed the entire thing away. There goes $500,000. And so it's not going to work long term. Now, one of the people who was involved in this effort tried to spin it, saying that, well, it did protect the houses. Yeah, it got washed away, but it did its job in that it protected our properties. I mean, yeah, this times. But what are you going to do? Spend $500,000 every single time there's a big storm? That's not sustainable, obviously, especially if you get 3 or 4 of these a year. Then even if you got, 10 people going in on it, because like how big is this sand dune? Those houses tend to be large on some property and a little bit spread out. So let's say you got 10 people even, splitting this $500,000 dune. You get 3 or 4 of those a year. I mean, you're just dumping tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars into your property. That's called losing money. You'd just be better off trying to dump it. But anybody who sees these stories is going to realize that it's futile trying to protect your property over the long term. And, you can talk to people who are involved in efforts to like track sea level rise. And it's definitely a very real phenomenon tied to climate change. So, this is, I think, an early episode and little, example here of what is going to be happening increasingly in the next couple of decades as the situation is exacerbated. So that's for odds and ends. Let's get into right now. I know that there's more chat, and I will come back to that. Let's get into some stuff I wanted to do on the economy. This I wanted to do on Monday, but we decided to call it at 4 hours. The U.S. economy is not doing great, as we've been discussing for some time. So we're going to talk about something called the Buffett indicator for a minute. There's many different indicators within capitalism of where you are in the business cycle. So for people who don't know the business cycle, it was described by Marx and Engels. I mean, it's been known for a long time, like 200 years, that there are booms and busts. Why? They are what Marxists call overproduction crises. So basically, capitalism is productive, but then in order to protect profits and prices, it has to slow down, stop production, throw people out of work. And then after the excess commodities have been consumed, and so there's scarcity again, then the system can kick back into production and the whole thing starts again. But you're in this constant thing of boom and bust. That's not a thing that you can escape in capitalism. It's impossible. Actually, what we're seeing right now, and I'll put up my favorite screenshot that I've been spending a lot of time on. As I mentioned before, a lot of what I watch right now as far as YouTube and news that I read is economists talking about what's going on with the housing market, because this started for me in trying to understand the housing crisis, and then I realized we are in another 2008 type situation. So 2008 was the end. It was when the bubble popped, a bubble that had been brewing in 04, 05, 06, 07, and then when it started to crash, I mean, so much speculation was tied up in this that when the prices crashed, it really just brought down so much of the economy, and it caused a credit crunch where everybody's credit was hurt. Banks didn't want to lend to anybody. the government had to step in a massive way, and the Federal Reserve, and trying to alleviate this credit crunch and just basically throwing money at people to keep the engine, like it's like if your engine runs out of oil and just seizes. They were trying to prevent that with the economy by just keeping money flowing. But by the numbers, nobody had the credit to be lent to. So what we can see here is we're at the top, and it's almost the end of the ride of another massive, massive bubble, which is a huge deviation from the 130-year average. This chart goes back to the 1890s, and I want to credit Reventure Consulting, very rapidly growing channel. I started watching them when they were pretty small. They have like 500,000 subscribers now. The title of the video is "The Biggest Mortgage Collapse in U.S. History is Happening Right Now." So imagine you could go back to 06, 07 and watch the whole 2008, 2009, 2010 saga play out from, in real time from the top. Well, we're getting that opportunity now. I mean, I'd rather just have a stable economy, but this is what we have. We have, this is inflation adjusted house prices. So even adjusted for inflation, we're in a bigger bubble than 2008. Even if you want to say that, even prior to that, it's trending upwards a little. Okay, we're in a bubble at least as big as 2008. When it pops, yes, they're going to have all sorts of mitigation measures. They're really running out of tricks, though. And to a certain extent, you just can't escape this in capitalism, is the point. So it seems like we're at the top of a market that's about to come down in a big way. And they've been dragging their feet on this. That's where all this is coming from, is the boom-bust cycle. You can't stop it, but lately they've been trying to stretch it out with quantitative easing and all of these other things that, despite all of that, what goes up must come down at some point, and they are trying their darndest to slow it down, to delay it, and to pad the landing. And they're trying to get people, they're trying to keep people's confidence in the system so that the average schmuck investor keeps putting money in and doesn't pull their money out of the stock market or whatever else, and keeps the system going, because capitalism is exploitation and it does just prey on people's ignorance. And so that's why the big media is just telling people, oh, it's going to be fine, soft landing, yes, there's going to be a downturn, but you're not even going to know it's happening. This should be really interesting, like once everything shakes out, given where we're at with prices right now. But coming back to the Buffett indicator, this is like one sign of, named after Warren Buffett, because for a long time he said this was his favorite single analytic. It is total U.S. stock market value divided by GDP. So right now it is pretty high. It's 184%. So continuing here, and again, this is not a Marxist tool. It's something that the capitalist investors use. Let's see what it says. This ratio fluctuates over time since the value of the stock market can be very volatile, but GDP tends to grow much more predictably. The current ratio of 184% is approximately 51%, or about 1.6 standard deviations above the historical trend line, suggesting that the stock market is overvalued relative to GDP. Why does it matter? Well, if the stock market value is growing much faster than the actual economy, then it may be in a bubble. What's a bubble? Widespread overvaluation. Okay, so when that's the case, it's just being driven up by speculation and hype, like, for example, the AI hype, which they're saying, like, most of the rest of the stock market isn't doing well, but the, quote, Magnificent Seven stocks, the tech stocks, Google, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, which makes the chips, and Tesla. I always miss one of these. But anyway, those big companies, they are doing well. Nvidia is doing insanely well because they're the ones selling the hardware that everybody else is playing with. The rest of the stock market isn't at all. Like, if you take those seven stocks out, first of all, they're a huge, percentage-wise, huge amount of the capitalization of the stock market. And so if they start doing badly, the rest of the stock market is just not going to do well. And we could see some major shifts happening with that, which we've been in this protracted period since 2008 or 2010 I mean, the economy started coming out of this in like late 2012, really. And they've been just kind of trying to make everyone forget that that ever happened ever since. Probably, though, we're on the cusp of this coming back in a huge way. So there's a chart of the Buffett indicator, number of standard deviations from the historical trend line. You can see that it's way above right now, as it was at the time of the dot-com bubble before 2000. It was strongly overvalued, and then there was a big crash. It was also overvalued, you can see there, in 2007 and 2008. However, that was driven by some other things than the stock market itself. But in this case, in this coming downturn, probably there's going to be a lot more stock market involvement. So anyway, it goes on into a lot of detail, but I just wanted to point that out. We've discussed a number of different indicators showing that we're in kind of a market high right now, and it is going to be probably going back down sharply soon. Which, why do we care as communists for this? Well, first of all, a lot of workers are going to be thrown out of work, but what does this mean? It means opportunities for agitation and education, because when things are sort of doing well or seem to be stable, people are less questioning of the system itself. When the system starts to shake underneath their feet, they go, oh yeah, the system I took for granted as always being here might not be here, and then what's going to happen to me? And we can come in and start explaining to people this is just another crisis of capitalism. It's inherent, and if you want to get rid of this and have a more stable thing, you have to get rid of capitalism itself. So what are some other indicators? I mean, we've talked about things like people living off of credit. Increasingly, you see credit card debt going way up. Also, credit card delinquencies and auto loan delinquencies going up recently. Here's one. Family Dollar is closing nearly 1,000 stores. Here's how long you have to shop. So this is Dollar Tree Incorporated, which also owns Family Dollar. And I guess you just have to ask yourself, when people can't afford to shop at the dollar store, how long before the rest of the economy starts really showing it? So the article says nearly 1,000 Family Dollars across the country are closing up shop. On March 13, the parent company Dollar Tree announced in a press release its plans to shutter nearly 1,000 Family Dollar stores after seeing declining sales in 2023. According to the report, that includes roughly 600 locations, which will close by June. After that, about 370 Family Dollar and 30 Dollar Tree stores will follow suit once each lease term finishes. So they will ride out their lease and then not continue. There are currently over 8,000 Family Dollar locations across the U.S. Dollar Tree Inc., which owns Family Dollar, has not yet released an official list of stores that would be impacted, but a spokesperson told ABC, quote, Family Dollar and Dollar Tree stores are important to thousands of communities across the country. We owe it to those we serve to position all of the stores for success and meet the expectations of our valued customers and associates, unquote. So didn't really say anything. So it's widely considered a go-to for greeting cards, school supplies, and candy. I'll add, especially for people outside the U.S., U.S. teachers often have to buy their own supplies for their kids out of pocket. And so I know teachers that definitely bought a lot of stuff at the Dollar Tree for that reason. And it's such junk. Like, I have to say, yeah, it's cheap, but sometimes things are inexpensive, but they still work okay. Like I get a lot of like store brand food, for example, because it's basically indistinguishable from the thing that might be $1 or $2 more expensive. The stuff they sell at Dollar Tree though is crap. I mean, by and large, it is junky. Like, you can feel it kind of breaks in your hands just like picking it up off the shelf. And I think it's a bad message for kids giving that to them, because it's like, here's what you're worth. Like, here's like a literal piece of fucking trash that you're being given as like a prize. And it's just kind of sad and depressing, Anyway, the shops also serve as grocery stores for families who live in food deserts. So if you don't know what a food desert is, it's an area that doesn't really have access to quality supermarket with like fresh produce and stuff like that. Instead, having to rely on bodegas and things like that have, a lot of packaged food, shelf-stable stuff that is lower quality. A lot of times it's overpriced. but food desert's a big problem. We're talking about health and wellness before. That definitely contributes. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, about 53.6 million people, or 17% of the U.S. population, over 1 in 6, lives in an area that is low income and low access, and are more than 1/2 mile, or 10 miles, from the nearest supermarket. So those are kind of like the different gradations of, food insecurity, or like having difficulty to access a variety of healthy food. What's more, the closures at Family Dollar and Dollar Tree do leave a rather significant hole that other thriving discount stores seem eager to fill. Earlier this year, Dollar General committed to stocking thousands of its locations with fresh fruits and produce. We'll see how long that lasts. Quote, "We are constantly looking for ways to better serve our customers, and one of our top priorities is to ensure the communities we call home have access to fresh, affordable, and convenient food options," Dollar General Executive VP Emily Taylor told USA Today. News of the closures comes on the heels of Macy's also announcing that it would be closing 150 stores across the country by 2026. And I'll just add, Macy's, they sell a lot of clothing. Clothing's one of those things I find like I still go to the store to buy, because unless it's like just a t-shirt or something, or unless you really, really know your size, trying on clothes is really helpful sometimes in just saving yourself some time of having to return stuff. I know people who, buy like shoes on Amazon and they just send back like 8 pairs using the free returns. And it's just like, you could have just saved yourself so much fucking time. Plus, you wouldn't have had to, granted the store is paying for it, but it's such a waste of like having a delivery truck pick it up, take it back, deliver you the next thing. It's just wasting fuel doing that. Like, whereas if you just went to the store once, you could have just found what you were looking for. It's a very inefficient system, although right now it is winning out in terms of being the cheapest and so on. As far as other big store trends, this was one that somebody brought to my attention recently. We were recently talking about the Walmart CEO, Doug McMillon, which I was pronouncing as McMillion because you just can't help yourself, said that consumer spending is tougher to predict in 2024 because of rising credit card balances and dwindling household bank accounts. So Walmart already has its eye, and has had its eye for a little while, on the fact that, the average U.S. consumer is not doing as well. So one of the things that some Walmarts are doing is they have those self-checkouts, which you see everywhere now, or practically everywhere. They certain stores, which they make a point in this article of saying that this is like up to individual stores, at least that's the official public line, that Walmarts may require customers to use an app and a subscription to sign in to use the self-checkout. Now, I think at a certain point, like, people would rather have somebody else ring up their stuff, especially if, you have like a full cart of food, like you're doing like a whole week's shopping trip. I don't feel like spending, 10, 15 minutes ringing that up. I should get paid to do that, because basically otherwise they would have had to pay a worker to do that. But sometimes if you just have 1 or 2 items, ringing it up yourself can be easier. Plus, if you're COVID conscious, as I am, sometimes it's just better to ring it up yourself than nobody else is handling it. I understand that somebody stocked it to put it out there, but it's maybe it's been sitting on the shelf for, I don't know, a week, and therefore, whatever pathogens are on it have sort of disintegrated under the fluorescence and all that, and somebody's not handling it literally right before you bring it home. But what was one of the reasons why? So retailers have been rethinking their approaches to self-checkout in the past year, as a combination of softening sales and sticky shoplifting are putting a squeeze on profitability. So they thought it would be more profitable to not have cashiers and have people ring up their own shit. Actually, now they're finding that there is partial shrink. A recent study found that self-checkout contributes to a phenomenon known as partial shrink, where customers accidentally, I like the very, very charitable there, customers accidentally fail to properly scan and pay for all the items in their transaction. So, requiring shoppers to log into an account before using self-checkout could help stem some of those losses. So if they don't have your name, address, and payment information, they're not going to let you ring up your own shit. And so what does this mean? If you have to do that and you ring up the wrong thing, are they going to be billing your card? Are they going to be billing your payment information? This leads to some potentially very interesting situations down the line. So in another indication of how the economy is going, this is a story from CNBC. Layoffs rise to the highest for any February since 2009, Challenger says. So this is by Jeff Cox from Thursday, March 7. Layoff announcements in February hit their highest level for the month since 2009, Challenger, Gray, and Christmas reported Thursday. With a series of high-profile layoff waves, tech leads the way this year in cuts with 28,218, though that number has fallen 55% from the same period a year ago, I guess in tech itself. But interesting, what was going on in 2009? Oh yeah, the aftermath of the whole collapse, the Bear Stearns thing, and all of that in late September, September 2008, late 2008. So let's keep reading. Layoff announcements in February hit their highest level for the month since the global financial crisis, 2008, according to outplacement firm Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. The total of 85,000 planned cuts showed an increase of 3% from January and 9% from the same month a year ago, with tech and finance companies at the forefront. So finance companies also. Do we have another storm brewing in the financial sector? I think entirely possible. From a historical perspective, this was the worst February since 2009, which saw 186,000 announcements as the worst of the financial crisis was seemingly coming to an end. Financial markets bottomed the following month, paving the way for the longest economic expansion on record, lasting until the COVID pandemic in March 2020. Of course, all the quantitative easing definitely helped. For the year, companies have listed 167,000 cuts, a decrease of 7.6% from a year ago. So that's within the tech sector specifically. Quote, as we navigate the start of 2024, we're witnessing a persistent wave of layoffs, said Andrew Challenger, the firm's labor and workplace expert. Quote, businesses are aggressively slashing costs and embracing technological innovations, actions that are significantly reshaping staffing needs. Unquote. With a series of high-profile layoff waves, tech leads the way this year in cuts with 28,000, although that number has fallen 55% from the same period a year ago. Well, and I think partly some of these companies are staying afloat on the AI hype, which is helping to fund them, so they don't have to do as many layoffs. Which again, this time last year, like Open AI hadn't done the GPT-4 yet. Like that was just coming out in April. So yeah, layoff announcements at financial firms have risen 56% compared with the first 2 months of 2023. So the same decrease that was seen in tech, there was an increase of the exact same size, or percentage-wise at least, in the financial sector. Other industries planning significant cuts include industrial goods manufacturing, energy. Wow. So industrial goods manufacturing is up. This is just, yeah, am I reading this correctly? So the other one was up 56%, layoffs at financial firms. Industrial goods manufacturing up 1,754% from a year ago. Now it is percentages, might have been a very small, they didn't include the absolute number. It might have been a very small absolute number. That's still like, even if it was 3, 3 times that number is still a really big number. Energy, which is up 1,059%, and education, which is terrible, up 944%. The layoff numbers, however, are not feeding through to weekly jobless claims, suggesting that unemployment is short-lived and workers are able to find new positions. Well, is that the case, though? Because, the jobless claims don't include people who have given up on looking for work. And so, they try to give that a rosy spin. There are exceptions that might not be the way that they're spinning it. Initial filings for unemployment insurance totaled 217,000 in the most recent week, unchanged from the previous period and exactly in line with Wall Street estimates. Exactly in line. So even some of these numbers, like looking at payrolls and stuff, some of the reports don't agree with each other. So it's possible that these numbers are fake news. I'm not prepared to do that analysis at this point. That is something I've been seeing consistently from some other news that I've been watching, where if we dig deeper into that, it doesn't seem to line up. Use of credit is going up, delinquency is going up. People are being squeezed a lot harder. So what we do know is that the capitalists are able, the people who run this system, are able to keep things for now looking okay. You know, we see Japan entering recession, Germany, the UK, Finland, and so on. The US is still able to play with its numbers so that it doesn't look bad yet. I suspect by the end of this year, they're no longer going to be able to come up with anything so rosy. Challengers experts say that companies most often cite restructuring plans as the main reason for the reductions in workforce. Artificial intelligence has been cited for just 383 cuts, although, quote, technological updates in general have been at the root of more than 15,000 reductions, or nearly as much as all the years combined since 2007. Quote, in truth, companies are also implementing robotics and automation in addition to AI. It's worth noting that last year alone, AI was directly cited in 4,247 job reductions, suggesting a growing impact on companies' workforces, Challenger reported. So I think it's interesting looking at these signs that there are, and this is far from comprehensive what we've done here. We've done some in the past. There's a smattering of things here. Keeping that in mind, that there are just so many signals that we're in for a big popping of the bubble and a crash. I found this article, which it just makes you wonder sometimes. This is from February 28 by Alex Lawson in The Guardian. Millennials are on course to become the, quote, richest generation in history. The generational transfer of wealth, largely built up in property, will amount to $90 trillion in the U.S. alone, a report says. Is this really the case? Well, let's read a bit and then I have some thoughts. Millennials may have been portrayed as frivolous spenders squandering their income on overpriced coffees and online classes in the face of pitiful long-term finances. Yeah, none of that was true. Okay, that's just called blaming the victim. That's punching down. That's all that is. You know, avocado toast is not why you can't afford a house. It's not why you can't afford college. It's not why you can't afford medical care, and so on. But millennials are on course to become the, quote, richest generation in history, a study has shown. Those born between 1981 and 2000 are in line for a, quote, seismic windfall over the next 20 years, according to research by real estate agent Knight Frank, thanks to the property assets accumulated by the generations before them. Now, here's the basic question before we go any further with this. Is that wealth going to actually stay in millennials' pockets, or is it going to get eaten up by rising cost? Okay, so first of all, bold of you to assume that that value is actually going to get passed down to the next generation, inherited, bequeathed to the next generation. With the way that medical care works in the United States, people in the last decade of their life tend to rack up enormous medical expenses, which may or may not be covered by insurance. So how do you pay for that? Well, most of the value that people have is like equity that they have in a house or something like that. So you have to sell that. So if you're selling that, and then or even just taking out like a loan based on that, that's not something that you can transfer to the next generation in an inheritance, right? So then beyond that, to whatever doesn't get eaten up and actually does get transferred, handed down to the kids, are the kids going to be able to just kind of pocket that and then be affluent? I mean, to a certain extent, a little bit, but you look at student debt, you look at just rising costs in general, as I was just saying, like credit card spending going up because people are super squeezed right now. Trying to do anything is just incredibly expensive, like anything, including just living, incredibly expensive. So how much of this is just going to get spent. That's really what's being overlooked. Anyway, I'll leave that there. Let's move on to the next article, which I think says more about this. First of all, this is something that we did recently from CBS News. More young adults are living at home across the U.S. Here's why. This is from September, so just a few months ago. And it says more than 60% of Gen Zers and millennials reported moving back home in the past 2 years, often because of financial challenges. So that's kind of how millennials are doing right now. Anyway, you got to live with mom and dad because you can't afford to live on your own. It's too expensive. I'm a little bit older. I was fortunate enough to be able to get some independence and live out on my own. A lot of people just don't have that option. And, so your roommates or your parents. But going beyond that, here's another story. This is from March 12. Nearly 50% of U.S. parents are financially supporting their adult children, a study finds. The soaring costs of food and housing are forcing many still to rely on parents to cover expenses as they risk retirement security. Nearly half of U.S. parents provide some kind of financial support to their adult children who are grappling with higher food and living costs than they did, a new study has found. So again, is this money just going to get spent? That would be my guess. Continuing, the study was conducted by Savings.com, and it found that young working class Americans were not substantially benefiting from the, quote, recovery of the country's economy, as evidenced by high employment, falling inflation, and economic growth. That has forced many of them to continue to rely on their parents to help cover costs of living. The average age of adults receiving financial help from their parents, sometimes at the risk of the parents' retirement security, was 22, according to the study. And while parents surveyed in the study on average said that their adult children should become financially independent by 25, that's making some assumptions about where things are going to end up, can they get jobs, etc. Many were supporting those children beyond that milestone. Of parents providing support, 21% were helping millennials, aged 28 to 43, or members of Gen X, 44 to 59. Millennials and Gen X adult children were, on average, given between $907 and $960 each month by their parents. Gen Z adults, between 18 and 27, were getting more help from their mothers and fathers, averaging about $1,500 monthly. Notably, many adults from Gen Z still have college and university expenses, and I may add, will have those expenses for quite some time to come. Again, another failed promise of Joe Biden. They were going to do the college loan forgiveness. It got blocked, and it's not a political priority. Instead, funding Israel's genocide, that's the priority. And again, this ties back into the needs of not just the Democratic Party or their political weaknesses, or not just the Republican Party. It's the needs of capitalism at a system. It's the needs of capitalism as a system at this point, which needs to put the cost of everything increasingly on workers. As the rate of profit falls, as it's harder for them to scrounge up those tasty profits, well, how do they deal with the shortfall? It's by pushing costs onto workers, externalizing more and more costs onto society. The most common expenses that parents covered for adults across those three generations were groceries, food, cell phone bills, which is required basically to live in this society, rent, mortgages, tuition, and health insurance. With soaring costs of food, housing, and other living expenses, more adults are either choosing or being forced to still live in their parents' home, the survey determined, and the future outlook of the cost to live in the U.S. remains bleak. Again, I believe that we're going to see a big crash coming in the next few years, but what's likely to happen is it's going to go right back up after that. So you get this brief window of relief, after which it'll just go back up, just like we saw, if we go back to the 130-year chart of inflation-adjusted housing prices. What you don't see is a stable line. Look there between, the post-war period, 1945 to 1980. You got pretty much stable prices, inflation adjusted. They even went down a little bit over time. Then there's a peak in 1980, the beginning of the neoliberal period, and then another peak in 1990, which is a pretty significant rise and fall and a pretty sudden and significant rise and fall. And then after that, we go into neoliberalism 2.0, the war on terror years. In the 2000s, gigantic housing spike and then crash. And now again, the exact same thing. It's the opposite of stability. It is not pure chaos, but it is just huge rises and huge falls. And you just don't, it's constantly moving. It's not stable. It's not steady. And I will add, one of the things that socialism really strives for is price stability. And what we're looking at is the exact opposite of price stability in this case. So moving on with the article, all food prices are predicted to increase by nearly 3%, according to the U.S. Agriculture Department. Supermarket and grocery store purchases are expected to increase by 1.6%. Affordable housing, meanwhile, remains in short supply. That's putting it mildly. The levels of housing inventory for sale, I mean, then there's rent, but for sale is at like 40% of pre-pandemic levels. It's starting to catch up in certain regions, particularly the Southeast, but there's still quite a way to go, and probably investors won't cough up those properties and put them back on the market until things get a lot tighter, at which point you'll probably see a gigantic slide. It'll happen all at once as people try to beat, they try to sell theirs before the prices tank, but then everybody will get the same message basically all at the same time. Until then, they're all holding out. Remember, it is a big con game in the end. So anyway, if an adult in the U.S. is even able to buy a house, record high interest rates can deter them from taking out a mortgage or home loan. In October 2023, the average interest rate for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage was nearly 8%, a more than 20-year high, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association. By the way, side note, the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, or just 30-year mortgage in general, has become a standard, but it wasn't always the standard. It used to be 20 years. And actually, if you're buying like commercially, it's shorter, like 5, 10, or 20. But it became a 30-year mortgage because, first, they can bleed you for longer, and people couldn't afford it as much. If you look up, they've started to float 40-year mortgages. So like if you buy that at the age of 40, you'll never own it until you're 80. So you'll just be paying, the bank will own it until you're 80 years old. Continuing, while interest rates have since fallen for many, they haven't fallen enough, especially since houses are also more expensive. The average age of homebuyers last year was 49, and they're only getting older. A new Harris Poll Thought Leadership and Future Practice survey of U.S. renters from all age groups, Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and Boomers, reported 61% said that they were worried they would never be able to own a house, with some saying that the areas in which they live had become so unaffordable that they were, quote, barely livable. And this is true. The West Coast, the East Coast, and a significant section inland from those, with a few pockets of cheaper stuff. But by and large, both coasts and a significant portion inland is priced to infinity right now. There's, again, some more relief in the Southeast. Florida's starting to crack, although Florida was cranked way, way, way up. Texas is starting to drop, in part because they built a lot of new houses. The impact of that hasn't even been fully felt yet. But then a lot of that, quote, flyover country, like states that aren't necessarily the most desirable north of Texas, those are cheaper and falling. But, it varies by zip code, too. Anyway, yes, large swaths of 4 or 5, 6 states in a row are just priced to hell. And so if you want to move to get out of that, you have to move a 10-hour drive away. You have to move completely out of the region that you're in. That's how a lot of the country is right now. Younger generations also carry more student loan debt than ever and make lower wages when adjusted for inflation. But supporting their adult children could compromise parents' ability to save for their own future. So again, putting the conclusions of that last article in doubt somewhat. Working parents were found to contribute 2.4 times more to support adult children than they do to their retirement accounts each month, according to the Savings.com study. The average amount a parent gives to their adult child each month is about $1,400, more than twice what the average working parent contributed to their own retirement savings monthly, which on average was $609. The study also said that 61% of adults living at their parents' homes don't pay rent or contribute to any household expenses. The study concluded that, quote, there is a clear challenge in the economy today, you think, driven by a convoluted mix of socioeconomic factors, not really that convoluted. Adults receive help from their parents well into their 20s, 30s, and beyond, the study said. For some, it's tempting to simply say that, this makes me so mad. For some, it's tempting to simply say that today's young adults are just mooches and that a strong foot in the rear will launch them into normal, independent adulthood. Now, what you're considering normal is the product of a previous stage of the class system. That was normal for boomers because that's where capitalism was at that point. And it's just delusional. It's a denial of the reality in front of you to think that people can still conform to that. No, people didn't just suddenly become lazy. No, boomers are not some paragons of work ethic and virtue and all of that. This is due to structural factors in the economy. Thinking that way may be gratifying for parents who are tired of footing the bill and who, don't want to grapple with the realities that they just sucked up to capitalism and this is where it got them and their children. But it doesn't solve or even properly describe the economic factors at play, such as rising housing costs. And again, we looked at those bubbles twice. What's driving that? A lot of what is driving this bubble activity that, again, this is my favorite image in the world right now. What is driving these huge spikes? A lot of it is small to mid-level investor activity. There is, we've discussed previously, some Democrats came out with a bill to ban hedge funds getting involved in the economy. And yes, it's true that some very large capital firms have gotten involved in buying single-family houses and duplexes and stuff like that and becoming corporate Wall Street landlords. That, to some extent, has happened. However, it is dwarfed by smaller and mid-level investors that are trying to get rich quick without doing any work, just buying a house, maybe doing minor renovations, and then just flipping it for a ton of money. So, but when your way of, quote, earning a living, really just scamming people, is hoarding housing, a basic necessity, no, you're fucking scum. And a socialist United States, or whatever it would become at that point, if not the United States, a socialist country would not be allowing this kind of activity. Housing would be a right, and all of the decrepit, housing that is not really suitable for living in would be torn down and replaced with modern, decent housing, and so on. You would need a revolution in the housing sector, but no more of this scarcity-based housing thing and treating housing as an investment, etc. All of that would be gone in socialism. We live in really angering times. We've just seen that it's practically impossible to, forget getting ahead, just keeping your head above water these days. So what's going on within the U.S. government? How are they responding to the fact that people are freaking out? Well, from CNN Politics, headline, Justices Barrett and Sotomayor urge Americans to tone down political rhetoric despite charged atmosphere. Incredible. Yeah, we took your rights, but can you just calm the fuck down? No. End capitalism. Join an anti-capitalist organization today. Fight for anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist principles in your organizations. We need to end capitalism. We need to stop this system. So anyway, reading some of this article, 2 Supreme Court justices on Tuesday urged Americans to turn down the temperature of civic discourse, even as the High Court is working through some of the most charged political cases to land on its docket in years. Quote, why should any of us want to obliterate the opposition or even see another person as the opposition? So this is what you're getting from, as the saying goes, if your rights depend on fewer than a dozen people who are political appointees appointed for life and giving you that right, you don't really have that right. And here we get some bipartisanship because you get the far-right religious crazy and then the supposedly more liberal progressive there. agreeing on this. Why would you even see another person as the opposition? I don't know, because they're trying to take every last penny I have. I usually consider people like that enemies. Anyway, Justice Amy Coney Barrett told an audience in Washington, D.C. during an event focused on civic education. I mean, just does this land with anyone is really my question. I don't know who at this point, if you're not literally on the Supreme Court or in Congress, does this land at all? Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that on the Supreme Court, she and her colleagues come to disagreements with an assumption that all 9 are operating in good faith. Really? Because if I was there, I would assume that they are part of a cult and are completely incapable of doing anything but just the most utterly bootlicking type of service to capital that is possible. So anyway, I think that the public discourse has lost some of that, Sotomayor lamented. There's a lot of personal attacks on people's character. The comments came as the Supreme Court has been wrestling with several high-profile political controversies, including a recent case challenging former President Donald Trump's eligibility to appear on Colorado's ballot and his claims of immunity from criminal prosecution. Neither justice mentioned those cases or any others in their remarks at George Washington University during the annual Civic Learning Week National Forum. Barrett, a Trump nominee, noted at one point that justices have the, quote, ability to write an opinion more broadly or more narrowly as one way to find compromise, and that not everything has to be decided in an opinion. Then they go on to talk about the Trump thing a little bit. I couldn't really care less, but here's a reminder from ProPublica that Justice Clarence Thomas had a child in private school, and then this right-wing crazy Harlan Crow paid the tuition. Crow paid for private school for a relative Thomas said that he was raising, quote, as a son. And, ethics lawyers say this is obviously way outside the norm. And so these people are just completely bought by the people who are screwing you, your family, your friends, out of everything that you own. And they're putting everything, all of your dreams, all of your future at risk. But they're telling you, be calm. Don't flip out. The system is working as intended. If the system is working as intended, then we need a new system. Meanwhile, speaking of the system, this is what's been going on in New York City. So, per the New York Times, the National Guard and state police will patrol the subways and check bags. So the governor said that amid a series of violent crimes in the subway, they would deploy 1,000 members of the state police and National Guard to the transit system. And then immediately afterwards, there was a domestic violence situation where a man threw his girlfriend onto the tracks. I think she lived. But strangely enough, they were not there to stop this thing from happening. Almost like it's more about, just intimidating people and reminding people that they are living under a brutal police state that is constantly watching them. And so from Dang Laser on Blue Sky, day 2 of Candy Crush Regionals, heating up there, how much do you think it costs for these, 24 cops to be standing around looking at the floor? But this is what you can expect, more and more of this as the system gets worse, especially after the next economic crash, because they go toward the fascism when capitalism goes into crisis. That's essentially what fascism is. It's a class collaborationist, national unity type of thing that tries to get people to forget the class struggle. It'll use some quasi-socialist imagery sometimes, but its content is anti-socialist, counter-revolutionary, may, again, use the aesthetics of socialism here and there when it needs to as a strategy. But by and large, it's just there when capitalism needs to defend itself and it thinks that it is entering a period of vulnerability. So expect more of this. It ramped up quite a bit after 2008. But again, they were already laying the groundwork for this with the war on terror even before that happened. And now they're all set. They gave themselves all the tools that they will need. So about the emerging police state, let's turn to an article. It's another one out of The Guardian, actually, from March 7. So, headline, Socialism, Anti-Fascism, and Anti-Abortion on the Prevent list of terrorism warning signs. Communism is also among the ideologies on the document, as human rights groups say that the UK scheme has been politicized. A document from Prevent, the official scheme to stop radicalization, good luck with that, as your system collapses, includes believing in socialism, communism, anti-fascism. So when you are formally against anti-fascism, you are fascist. That's how that works. In a list of potential signs of ideologies leading to terrorism. Now, what do we actually see as far as the far left and the far right and terrorism? We see like way, many times more far right terrorism than you see, far left terrorism. There'll be maybe 20 cases of far right terrorism for every one case of left-wing terrorism. So, doing this and trying to put them up on the same footing, it's just not remotely the same. Because, again, remember that the purpose of right-wing politics generally is to defend capitalism in decline. And it's already a violent system, and they use the violence, as part of, that's just the way that it works. It's an extension of the state itself. The left wing, on the other hand, is much more concerned with building movements and building labor power and things like that. Left-wing terrorism is very infrequent, and it's usually, basically never tied to large organizations, at least, in countries like the UK where this is supposed to be, aimed at. But I guess they would include things like, quote, eco-terrorism or stuff like that in there. Anyway, let's continue. And I say that we've discussed terrorism a number of times on the channel. There's something from January that we did called On Terrorism by Bill Bland, and it discusses how this is not really a part of mass politics, and again, it's much more right-wing individualist thinking. But this comes as the conservative government considers widening what it will consider to be, quote, extremism. The document is part of Prevent awareness training for those covered by the duty to inform if they suspect radicalization. That includes teachers and youth workers. So keep that in mind when you're sharing things with teachers and youth workers, if you have to share anything with teachers and youth workers. In the U.S., we have something called mandated reporting, which generally covers more like child abuse. I'm not aware of anything in the U.S. of having to snitch on people for suspected radicalization, at least yet. So congrats, UK, you're ahead of the US on that. But the guidance was updated last year and published with little or no fanfare after William Shawcross's controversial government-ordered report on Prevent was released. A former head of counterterrorism said that it risked damaging Prevent. You think that putting anti-fascism in your radicalization symptoms is damaging it? Yeah, it's just telling everyone that you are fascist again. So anyway, a human rights group said that the government was playing political games under the guise of stopping terrorism. In a section on the left wing, it states, quote, two broad ideologies, socialism and communism, each are united by a set of grievance narratives, okay, or that might actually have some reality to it, which underline their cause. Neat. In a section on single-issue ideologies, the document reads, quote, narratives are likely to come from those who seek to change a specific policy or practice, as opposed to replacing the whole economic, political, or social system. Examples include animal rights, anti-abortion, or anti-fascism. What about a major misunderstanding of anti-fascism? If capitalism was able to declare itself truly anti-fascist, you wouldn't have a problem. Capitalism cannot do that, though. Needs to keep fascism in its back pocket at all times to play that card as things heat up. So it also talks about, Muslims who have been targeted since the 90s for this, and that is, another kind of racism that is also tied to, anti-colonial efforts going on in the Middle East and national liberation efforts. And we see in the genocide that Israel is waging in Gaza, across Europe, there have been people just waving a Palestinian flag at a protest who get targeted for that. So, there's sort of the usual suspects here. Amnesty International, this is yet another crackdown from the UK government to stifle freedom of expression. And it's so it also says, the documents themselves say, it's not your responsibility to risk assess the level of radicalization, and urges providing as much context as possible before it's shared with the police. So they're basically just like, dump all the content into the system, we'll sort it out. Don't you try to judge whether whether it's dangerous or not. If you see any of these warning signs, just tell us everything that you have. We'll figure it out. Don't try to use your own judgment, basically. It also asks any referral to include details of the ideology of concern, providing details of the ideology which may be contributing to making the person susceptible to radicalization. This training is designed to make sure that when you share a concern that a person may be radicalized into terrorism, it's informed, it's with good intention, the response to that concern is considered and proportionate. So again, like I said, the actual terrorism, like in the US, is almost exclusively from the right wing, yet strangely nothing seems to be done about that, like the mass shootings, it's right wing, etc. Why don't they do anything about it? Because capitalism needs these people. As it goes into crisis, it must draw on increased amounts of irregular police-type forces to cow the population and to keep things running business as usual. And they'll use as much terror as they need to try to hang on to that. All right, so last article before we get into the chat. And this actually ties in Israel. So there is, I can't read this whole article because it's extremely long, but this is from 2016, and this is inside GILEE, or I don't know if that's GILEE or how they pronounce that. It's the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. I'll say GILEE. The U.S.-Israel Law Enforcement Training Program seeking to redefine terrorism. So a lot of people noted that what was going on in the war on terror seemed to have very close parallels to what was going on in Israel as far as some of the policies that the U.S. was adopting, and this whole narrative of counterterrorism and anti-terrorism being used to justify all kinds of atrocities. And yeah, it turns out that Israel is actually very closely involved inside the U.S. in training law enforcement to do what is called anti-terrorism. However, those tactics, those systems can easily be turned for any other purpose, quote, terrorism or not. So the recent wave of heightened Islamophobia in the U.S. is not limited to the violent rhetoric and cruel policies of conservative politicians. It's also being drummed into police through a Georgia-based program that has sent thousands of American law enforcement officials to Israel for counterterrorism training. In an unusually candid discussion about the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, Program Director Robert Friedman recently declared that, quote, there is no Islamophobia. Patently false on its face. There is knife-ophobia, as he presented decontextualized video clips of Palestinians stabbing Israeli police officers. Gee, I wonder, is there any context to the conflict between Palestine and Israel? Would it involve colonialism? Would it involve land theft? Would it involve illegal settlements, etc.? No, it's just, Muslims love knives. End of story. Thank you so much, Israel, for explaining that. Friedman's audience was not his usual group of high-ranking police, military, and government officials. Rather, he was speaking to a small number of civilians at a December 7th, 2015 luncheon held by the Atlanta chapter of the American Jewish Committee. The talk, titled How Safe is America from ISIS, offered a glimpse into the racist ideology underpinning the trainings that police nationwide have undergone. So then there's a section here on Robert Friedman's Zionist advocacy. Friedman emigrated from Romania to Israel in 1950, then came to the U.S. in the 1970s to study sociology, and found his niche in researching community policing as a professor of criminology. I love sociology. I think of criminology as judgmental sociology. Basically, it's like if you take sociology, then build in lots of bourgeois norms about what is deviant and what is to be punished, boom, you got criminology. All right. He founded GILEE that can't be the way you pronounce it, but I don't know how to pronounce it, in 1992, initially to train local law enforcement in Israeli counterterrorism tactics that he believed were necessary to ensure security for the 1996 Olympics. The program has grown by leaps and bounds and now serves as a foreign exchange program for U.S. and Israeli police. In multiple delegations throughout the year, law enforcement officials from the U.S. travel to Israel for counterterrorism training, and Israeli police come to Georgia to learn about community policing and drug interdiction. According to Friedman's AIC presentation, AJC, sorry, text is small. 24,000 participants have engaged in 330 programs and 180 delegations during GILEE's 23-year life. So he also served on the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Georgia Security Council, and he got GSU, Georgia State University, awarded him an endowed chair worth $1 million, which was created specifically to support this program. All right, so then, amazingly, the Georgia General Assembly passed 2 resolutions commending the program, and the governor hosted the 20-year anniversary in the governor's mansion. So this is not some, out-of-the-way, under-the-radar program. It is celebrated at the highest levels of the Georgia state government. The heraldry is surprising even in a state like Georgia, given how blatantly Friedman's ideology hews to the extreme, which I find is pretty typical of people that close to Israel. The GILEE website features Stand With Us propaganda, articles by Alan Dershowitz, along with some penned by Friedman, who blasts Hamas for alleged war crimes while mentioning nothing of Israel's innumerable breaches of international law, and a bizarre tract on the importance of including Holocaust education in police training. Now, of course, we don't want people to forget the Holocaust. That is a bit of a strange place to put it. So there was a public scrutiny of the program for a while, but then over the past year, this was 2015-16, as the movement for Black Lives has forced the problem of police brutality into the national spotlight, journalists and activists have questioned how programs like this serve to militarize U.S. law enforcement. Like I said, this kind of stuff goes back to the Bush-Cheney years, especially because all this militarization of U.S. police, that was a lot of what was going on under the War on Terror funding. Some of it was going into, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere, but there were also counterterrorism budgets going to like random places in the Midwest that didn't really have, much of a problem with terrorism, but suddenly they are basically militarized outfits. And so this is a process. The U.S. always does these under the guise of the war on. It'll increase its militarization, whether it's the war on drugs. Saw a lot of militarization of police through that. And then the war on terror. It's not just something that's happening overseas. So anyway, I will leave the article here as it is quite long. But there is an explicit tie-in of one branch of the militarization and the more than just militarization in terms of the equipment, and to some extent that speaks to the mindset, but also just the fanatical outlook that is being taught to police, many of whom are former military. So they learn all these brutal tactics abroad, then they bring them back to the U.S. and start using them here, and Israel is helping with that process. So like we just covered in the last stream on Monday that Israel has been airing torture of Palestinian prisoners on TV. So I mean, these really the kind of people that you want. That's what their system is doing. Do you want to transport that system over here? Because that's definitely what is coming. And Israel needs to be stopped. It is to a large extent just an extension and a tool of U.S., UK, general the big imperialists. It is reaching levels that are extremely escalated, let's say. All right, let's leave it there for now because we've been going for a while. Let's get back to the chat. I think we actually might have to finish it out here and, I don't know, finish the rest later. All right. I'll try. I don't know if we're going to have time at all today for the the military stuff I was wanting to get to. That took longer than I thought. Still good stuff. But anyway, let's get back to the chat. Hakim, a good Marxist, but fell apart with his shitty Dengist positions. I was kind of surprised about that, actually, that Hakim went sort of full on with China, but I don't know. New World Gallup poll results say that the U.S. has dropped out of the world's top 20 happiest countries list. I didn't even know the USA was in the top 20 to begin with. This place is a capitalist hellhole. Yeah. Thoughts on avoiding publishing writing before being a well-read and informed Marxist? I mean, don't. How do you know when you're informed enough to speak? Study anti-revisionism thoroughly. That would be my main piece of advice. Learn your fundamentals and then learn the history of anti-revisionist struggles. With Earl Browder, it looks like he suddenly got bought off by some branch of the U.S. security apparatus. I don't know. There may be other explanations of that, too, that we'll get to. And yeah, to some extent, you're never going to be able to be perfectly informed. You're going to make mistakes when you go out there and attempt to engage in Marxist analysis. But yeah, really knowing your fundamentals and studying anti-revisionist history is super important. I felt like it took me at least 3 years before I really consistently, solidly knew what I was talking about without having to go back to the notes kind of thing, you know, of just kind of constant reinforcement. So it takes a while. And before that, you know, just having an attitude of being open to the fact that you don't know everything and not wanting to just get on and cheerlead one side. I think that drives a lot of people, like jumping on the Russia-China thing right now. There's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of aggression about, you have to support these things. Don't get swept up in that and push back against it or just ask questions. You know, for me, becoming more questioning of where China is headed, I think that they do still have remnants of their socialist legacy, which is something that was confusing to me. But where they are headed was just asking questions. And when people would get angry at really neutral questions or just didn't have anything more than just sort of propaganda level answers consistently, and could never point me to better analysis, I concluded there really wasn't a better answer. And I just had to say, okay, there's no real good answer to this question. Jim Jam got to get that righteous indignation dollars. Yeah, Jimmy Dore is fucking lost at this point. I mean, he's now just openly tailing anything Tucker Carlson does, even when it openly contradicts his previous stated positions. No explanation as to, trying to shore up the discrepancy at all. Isn't PCUSA Trotskyist? No, PCUSA is more Nazbol. They support Dugin and all that kind of stuff. They're, communo-fascism. I don't know what else to call it. They're right-wingers. Deeply revisionist, but I mean, it goes beyond just sort of garden variety revisionism into Dugin-style fascism. Let's see. The USA is a big cult. Most countries are. They want you paying attention to that flag and not the fact that 8 billion of us are in the same boat. Yes. I liked playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare through Black Ops while in high school, and 2 different times over those 4 years, I was contacted on Facebook by military recruiters trying really hard to get me to join. I remember having enough sense to say, I don't want to go kill people abroad who've never done anything to me before. Good for you, and a lot of people who are in more vulnerable positions, I mean, just even psychologically, that works on them, and they get sucked in, The timer on the bottom says that I've been streaming for almost 24 hours. Weird. I think Twitch does some weird glitches. It says 2 hours and 12 minutes for this session right now, but yeah. I had to reload the thing because it wasn't showing the graphic. So I don't know. It does weird glitches. I loved seeing the military personnel burning uniforms in solidarity with Aaron Bushnell. Yeah. If you live in the U.S., they try to convince you that we're the shining city on the hill. Yeah, American exceptionalism. I used to be way into Call of Duty in high school. I'm glad I made it out instead of getting pulled into the reactionary side of online gaming. Yeah. Um, I was a little older than this, so I didn't have that experience. You know, most of the games I played did not have an internet connection, so didn't have to face that. But there's a lot of pressure out there, and they're really aggressive, and they really know how to fuck with people to try to play on the vulnerabilities of teenagers. Here in Western Canada, we are already introducing water restrictions and expect the worst wildfire season on record, as well as severe drought. Yeah, I mean that's like in the U.S. The West Coast just catches fire like every other year, and there's just significant, really really bad fires. That was when the pandemic started. Some of the large employers like Facebook, they had huge stockpiles of respirators that they're having to give out to people, like for COVID, but they had stockpiled them because of the wildfires because the air quality was so bad. Honestly, all of the reactionary bullshit from people in online gaming made me more of an RPG fan over the years. Nothing wrong with that. I live on the beach, and the last several years, every year they have to do, quote, beach restoration, where they truck in hundreds of tons of sand to replace what erodes away. Yeah, absolutely. maybe Mr. Krabs can buy those oceanfront, soon to be below the ocean houses. I hear he's wealthy. There you go. Most, if not all, modern multiplayer games are super toxic. I tend to avoid them. I mean, it's just, super immature, toxic male bullshit being amplified, unsupervised, and it just feeds and feeds and feeds. And then you get the right wing political operatives that are out there to try to capture it and keep feeding it. And yeah, I mean, it's like if you look at what happened with what is now the incel world, it used to be a much less toxic thing called the loveshy community. And there would be loveshy forums and different things like that where people would talk about their issues with relationships and, just how they didn't necessarily feel comfortable in relationships or they felt, it was just people talking about all of the issues that they had with relationships. And then the right-wing incel activists went in there and started stirring it all in a very toxic direction and, full of misogyny and blaming women for like every problem that these men have ever had and so on. So yeah, these online communities have been really, really bad for that reason. They're very vulnerable to manipulation. There are very few of the real world checks that keep a group somewhat less extreme. Now that said, even in meat space, real world, there are communities that are definitely turning very extreme. Looking at you, right wing evangelicals, for example. But yeah, there is a lot of cult mentality out there for sure. People need critical thinking skills, and I keep thinking about and then forgetting to do that critical thinking thing. I don't know, part of me is just like it's a lost cause. I don't know why I subconsciously keep kind of dropping the critical thinking curriculum that I'm trying to do. I feel like doing the anti-revisionism thing, it's something very specific to the communist history that I feel like that is the priority, more the priority for me now, but we will come back to that critical thinking thing eventually. NVIDIA is automating nursing positions. Tech is called Hippocratic AI. Yeah, the next question, what could go wrong? I was just about to say, nothing about that is going to work correctly. Nothing. China is using AI to improve manufacturing while U.S. is advertising personal robot subscriptions. Yeah. Bit of a tangent, but I forgot to mention on Monday's stream, I saw something about how it's apparently illegal to get a genealogy test done in Israel. Something that was just passed in early December of 2023. Writing that one down. Curiouser and curiouser. There's a thread about it on 23andMe. All right, I'm putting that in these notes. If we can get through the chat quickly, I will try to do more of these articles so that we can finish out the show as intended. Otherwise, I'm like already in my head like I should do 2 streams next week, and I don't know. My local Target and the grocery store shut the self-checkout down. Yeah. I prefer self-checkout because I like to bag groceries in a way that makes sense to me. Same thing, actually. Like, it's more work, but Then I get home and it's like, oh, all the cold stuff is in, one or two bags and so on. I remember going to the store years ago and it was like they were putting two items per bag. And I was like, do you really want me to use 24 bags? What are you doing? And I would have to tell them, I'm like, just fill it to the top. Like, it's okay. I'm not going to like, they're like, well, you can't hold it by the handles. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, this isn't my first time at the supermarket. Expropriate goods from Walmart. Often, someone adds. Isn't Zuckerberg himself like 20% of that, quote, millennial wealth? I'm about to move back in with my mom. Housing is too expensive, and I'm trying to save up to move in with my partner. It's desperate out there. Like, it is not you, it's the market. It's absolutely structural. It is absolutely not you. We're living in a wildly unstable housing market. I mean, it's somewhat predictable in that there's a huge spike and then a huge crash, and then a huge spike and then a huge crash, and they're slow, but it's not stable at all. It's just always going up or always going down. There was like a brief period between like '09 and 12 where there was like relative stability, like affordability, and that was it. That was it. It took me 10 years to pay off $5,000 of college debt from only 2 semesters. I can't imagine how much others are struggling. Yeah, I think the average college debt is like $35,000 or something. So, yeah. My university here in Belgium is $1,000 a year. Yeah, that isn't very much. Yeah. I'd love to go back to school now that I've matured a good bit. I had a really easy time through high school and didn't develop any study habits or deadline discipline, performed really poorly in college and dropped out. Even trade schools here are more than $1,000 a year. Yeah. My wife is paying $4,000 or so per semester at a technical college, Canadian dollars. Oh, okay. So that's only like $8 US. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, that's still a good amount of money per semester too. I spent approximately $5,000 in 5 years, including housing, food, and tuition back in India. So yeah, US very, very expensive. My coworker said that capitalism gets a bad rap. Meanwhile, his wife just got laid off last month and he can barely afford his surgery fees. Am I losing my mind? No, he is. It's a cult-like principle. It's just people under intense, intense pressure not to think critically about the major norms, assumptions, and values. And that's what we need to encourage more of. I think that most boomers would explode if they had to work a full-time service job these days, to be honest. Yeah. You'd see a lot of boomer-on-boomer violence. It's true, no one is an entirely lost cause, but we got priorities. You do have to go for the lower-hanging fruit first, and if somebody's just really, really stubborn, I mean, you got other things to do. There was a Salt Lake City news story that showed cost of living compared to wages. It showed Utah as the third most expensive state to live in. The uber-conservative Mecca, run by real estate developers, must be proud. Thank you for that. My coworker told me Reagan had, quote, a great skill of bringing Americans together. So that was also a tough pill to swallow. I guarantee you he never thought about any of these things he was telling you. He just was, repeating them that somebody, told him once, and he never bothered to think about it. Reagan had skills and qualities which got him where he was, yet was called sucking up to the right wing and being willing to say whatever they wanted him to. I mean, he was an actor. He had some basic acting skills, which is good for lying to people. Period. We don't need to be singing Reagan's praises. That was really kind of a low point for politics, to be honest. Yeah, it says something about supposed authoritarianism of, communist countries, if communist-led countries, when you've got the duty to inform going on over, anti-fascist, quote, extremism. I think the reason why a lot of Marxists jumped into China stuff is because it didn't have neoliberal shock therapy the way that Russia did. I mean, they've done their own kind of, yeah, you're right, it's not exactly the same, but, Jeffrey Sachs, who was a big proponent of that, is now one of the leading multipolarity people. So, FF7 Rebirth is basically a jingoist military recruitment tool, so sad. S4A critical thinking and media literacy course would be cool. Yeah, I would love to do that. It benefited me a lot. We'll see if I can get to that. Critical thinking is key. I am a centrist. Let me say this. If you were thinking more critically, I doubt you'd be a centrist. Either that or you're wealthy, like whichever one it is. But so we have caught up with the chat now, and I'm going to get back into that little section on military recruiting that I was trying to do. So here's a little intro. The defense industry, historically, has been a proving ground for many of the systems we rely on today. These institutions are often leaders in emerging technologies, and we believe it's better to understand how their approach will impact our lives. So anyway, making a case for defense contractors to, get the credit that they deserve for being the pioneers. I mean, this is like admitting in a backhand way that, yeah, the economy is really a bunch of defense contractors in a trench coat. Should that be the way that it is, though? I mean, is that really necessary on a long-term basis? Anyway, speaking of, cultural institutions being infiltrated by the military, here's actually a very long article from The Guardian, Valentine's Day, February 14, 2024. The headline is, "The U.S. military is embedded in the gaming world. Its target, teen recruits. Amid a recruitment struggle, branches are using huge hits like Fortnite as marketing tools. Some veterans see the practice as unethical, you think, especially given the age of the gaming audience." So they're not even giving a lot of people a chance. And, this is what's happening on the inside. This is where the U.S. finds the people. They're getting to them before they can think for themselves, and that's a lot of what's happening. Yes, some people are joining because, they know what they're getting into. They're racist. They want to go do whatever. That's not necessarily the case everywhere, and we should be starving the U.S. military of recruits wherever we can. Again, look into counter-recruitment efforts, see if there's something that you can get involved in. But anyway, in a small room tucked into a U.S. Navy facility outside Memphis, Tennessee, uniformed personnel sit hunched over monitors, their eyes focused on screens as they speak into headsets with clipped efficiency. Computer towers and glowing red keyboards crowd their desks. This is top-of-the-line gear used for executing combat missions and coordinating strategy, but not with fleets stationed across the world. These sailors are playing video games. On the other end of their headsets and screens are young gamers they hope to inspire. Quote, "In 2019, we did a big look at where we are spending our money, looking at where the next generation is," says Lieutenant Aaron Jones, captain of the Navy's esports team. Yes, they have an esports team at the Navy. As we sit in his office after touring the facility, a naval press officer hovers a few feet away. "This is where they are," Jones continues. "Whether it's Twitch or YouTube or Facebook gaming, this is what they love." His esports team, Navy personnel who compete with gamers online under the name Goats and Glory, consists of 12 enlisted sailors who used to work as flight officers, sonar techs, and even a chaplain's assistant. Again, so much for the ethics there. A Navy recruiting command spokesperson says that the Navy allocates 3 to 5% of its marketing budget to esport initiatives annually. That amounted to up to $4.3 million from October 22 through September 2023 to budget information obtained through, according to budget information obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. So they're spending over $4 million a year trying to get to young people playing video games. Since 2018, the U.S. military has been ramping up its use of gaming to recruit more people. And again, let's be honest, to recruit more kids. At a critical time when the U.S. Armed Forces face the worst recruitment struggle since becoming an all-volunteer force, or in other words, dropping the draft, after the Vietnam War. Targeting gamers makes sense from the military's perspective, as it gives them access to the young, tech-savvy population they want joining up. And as I say, gives them access to the young, you want to just do like a slavering, like, yes, give me the young population. Oh, yes, delicious, that's what they're looking. They're looking at you as that plump new resource that they can sink their fangs into. That's how they see you. But some veterans told me that marketing the military with video games, especially making a game out of war, is unethical. Of primary concern is just how young the military's gaming audience is. Online gaming spaces are popular with minors, many of them not yet 13 years old. And the military deliberately capitalizes on games that appeal to them. If the military's recruiting efforts are successful, these kids and teens will end up applying the skills they honed while playing games they love to warfare, piloting drones to kill from afar, for example. And you can play all the fake fictional video games you like without it impacting your mental health. Maybe to a point. Okay, do have a life, do step outside. But when you're killing people with a drone quote game, eventually that's going to hit you, and you're going to realize, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? And it's a terrible, terrible thing that you're participating in. And eventually you're going to realize that. Whether you realize it or not, it's doing the damage. But you're just contributing to the pain and misery in the world. And you might not realize it now. You're going to realize it someday. And it's not good for anybody. One young gamer I spoke to, Katie K, age 12, spends hours a day watching live streams of people playing warlike games on YouTube and TikTok Live. The thought of fighting for her country intrigues her. She thinks it would teach her better discipline. Also, and you know what? Take martial arts. You don't need to go join the U.S. military and fight for corporate empire. Also, I would think about all the people that would thank me. Like, that would be cool. And, that's what a 12-year-old thinks, but the reality is starkly different. Quote, I was in a country fighting a population that lives on less than $1 a day with gigantic weapons and armored vehicles, says a former U.S. Army intelligence analyst, Jeremiah Knowles. And if I'm patrolling in Afghanistan with my assault rifle and a kid gets too close, ... he pauses. That's not what they put in the advertisements. That's not what they talk about on their Twitch streams. So I'm going to leave it there. Food for thought for you. Grossly unethical. Would you expect anything less than from the U.S. military? But this is going on now. As they said, since 2018, they're making an extra push on this stuff. Have you had experiences with this? Share it in the chat. Share it in the comments. Because, we've already heard from a number of people who did. Because they're getting more aggressive. They're finding this is the hardest time they've had finding recruits. People have caught on to their bullshit since the Bush-Cheney years. And, when they kept people in the military over and over again, they weren't letting them out of their contracts, and they were just redeploying and redeploying and redeploying. They were running out of people to support this bullshit. And so now they're literally going after 12-year-olds because that's the level that this has come to. So we have them up against the wall as far as they're having the most difficulty finding recruits. Let's continue to make it hard and make it harder and, make it impossible, ideally, for them to get these recruits. Then they'll have to go back to a draft system, and then you'll get a major struggle over that, and we have to keep fighting the system until it is dead. So there's no way out of fighting it, but, we got to fight them preying on our kids and, starve them of recruits, human resources, and eventually take control of the system. So, about the, expanding aspirations of the military. So here's an article from FedWeek. This is from February 2024. In Armed Forces News, Army planning a wider role in the space domain. So the mission director for the National Space Defense Center, in the picture there, points to a screen in front of a Space Force First Lieutenant at Schriever Space Force Base, Colorado. So, this is the U.S. military getting involved overtly in Space Command. Let's see what else we have. This is a pretty short article. The Army is formulating plans to play a greater role in the space domain. Quote, integrating joint and Army space capabilities into the operations process must become second nature to commanders at every echelon, Chief of Staff General Randy A. George said, as the service unveiled its Army Space Vision Supporting Multi-Domain Operations Initiative. We accomplish this by incorporating these capabilities into training, education, experiments, and exercises. Fulfilling the initiative's goals would require more investment in space capabilities and formations, the service stated in an announcement. They're kind of just getting going with this. The service's space professionals are being charged with leading the effort to place soldiers in a position where they can work within the centers of excellence, combat training centers, and other services institutions. Training would entail the use of live and virtual environments that would be akin to those encountered in future complex and uncertain battlefields. Try that again. To those encountered in future complex and uncertain battlefields. A vision paper accompanying the Army's announcement expressed the need to create, quote, expeditionary, scalable, and mobile Army space formations, empowered by flexible command relationships at echelon, which should move alongside and keep pace with ground combat formations to protect forces and enable the Army to win decisively. This is the creepiest stuff. In essence, service leaders believe that a better understanding of space as a combat theater would provide better protection for ground troops and thus allow them to prevail in any fight. Quote, by design, Army space capabilities are built to co-locate with and operate alongside ground maneuver formations, providing the appropriate effects for commanders to maintain timing, tempo, and synchronization, George said. So they're looking at this expansion into space basically as a way to enhance what's going on the ground. The integration of friendly assets within the Army, the other armed services, and commercial operators would pave the way for interdiction of adversaries, and again, the language that they use here, interdiction of adversaries, by directing fires, observation, counter-surveillance and reconnaissance, navigation, and targeting of counter-satellite communications threats. So this is, when I was introducing this earlier, this is not new, and the theoretical framework for this has been laid out in earlier military policy documents, like let's go back to Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century, a report of the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC, September 2000. So this was a think tank connected with the Bush-Cheney administration. And so here's some of the project participants. You may or may not recognize some of these names. Some of the better known ones are Elliot Cohen, I. Lewis Scooter Libby, Donald Kagan, Robert Kagan, a bunch of Kagans there, William Crystal of the Weekly Standard, major neocon mouthpiece, Dov Zakheim, Paul Wolfowitz, and there's some others that you may or may not know. But so these are some of the, when I say that it has, deep and extensive ties to the W administration, indeed. And so as we go into this document, what's this about? Rebuilding America's Defenses. In September of 2000? What do you mean rebuilding? The U.S. already had a huge military. Key findings. This report proceeds from the belief that America should seek to preserve and extend its position of global leadership by maintaining the preeminence, so not just, have it be good, have it be respectable, but the preeminence, just the uncontested domination of the world of U.S. military forces. Today, the United States has an unprecedented strategic opportunity. It faces no immediate great power challenge. So remember, this was 9 years or 8 or 9 years after the destruction of the USSR. So the U.S. saw itself as unopposed. It was the quote unipolar window of time. It faces no immediate great power challenge. It is blessed with wealthy, powerful, and democratic allies. Democratic, taken with a grain of salt here, in every part of the world. It is in the midst of the longest economic expansion in its history, and its political and economic principles are almost universally embraced. They're like, we are on top of the world right now. At no time in history has the international security order been as conducive to American interests and ideals. The challenge for the coming century, they're trying to chart the whole century here, map it all out, is to preserve and enhance this American peace. So Pax Americana, they want to have the 21st century be a new American century. That's what the name of the think tank means. So now you might be going, well, they weren't facing any major threats. Yeah, that's because they hadn't formulated the global war on terror yet, which was basically the auspices the excuse for all of this expansion that they're about to describe. They're like, well, we need to sell this to the public somehow, as we will see in this document. So, but they say, here's the rub, here's the twist. Yet, unless the United States maintains sufficient military strength, this opportunity will be lost. And in fact, over the past decade, the failure to establish a security strategy responsive to new realities and to provide adequate resources for the full range of missions needed to exercise U.S. global leadership, or I guess you could say hegemony, has placed the American peace at growing risk. This report attempts to define those requirements. In particular, we need to, and then here are the 4 core missions for U.S. military forces. And by the way, he talks about, all the wealth. There's a lot of things that the U.S. does not do well. The military is one of them that they never stop dumping money into and is very, very advanced. So here are the 4 core missions for U.S. military forces. 1, defend the American homeland, which at that time was not as widely used a term, and the Department of Homeland Security didn't exist. This was something these people brought in. 2, to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars. That is the second mission for U.S. military forces, to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars. 3, perform the, quote, constabulary duties associated with shaping the security environment in critical regions. What's constabulary? What does that mean? Well, it comes from the word constable, like police officer. So this was the 3rd major mission, is to keep being the world cop and shape the security environment. Then 4, transform U.S. forces to exploit the, quote, revolution in military affairs. To carry out these core missions, we need to provide sufficient force and budgetary allocations. In particular, the United States must maintain nuclear strategic superiority, basing the U.S. nuclear deterrent upon a global nuclear net assessment that weighs the full range of current and emerging threats, not merely the U.S.-Russia balance. Restore the personnel strength of today's force to roughly the levels anticipated in the base force outlined by the Bush administration. That is the first Bush administration, 89, that 1990 Bush administration, Bush Sr., an increase in active duty strength from 1.4 million to 1.6 million. And why? Just so that the U.S. can stay top dog. Reposition U.S. forces to respond to 21st century strategic realities by shifting permanently based forces to Southeast Europe and Southeast Asia, and by changing naval deployment patterns to reflect growing U.S. strategic concerns in East Asia. Wonder what they're talking about there. Okay, so continuing there, you see some highly technical other requirements that they're listing. But at the bottom, they say, fulfilling these requirements is essential if America is to retain its militarily dominant status for the coming decades. Conversely, the failure to meet any of these needs must result in some form of strategic retreat. At current levels of defense spending, the only option is to try ineffectually to, quote, manage increasingly large risks, paying for today's needs by shortchanging tomorrow's, withdrawing from constabulary missions to retain strength for large-scale wars, quote, choosing between presence in Europe or presence in Asia, and so on. So in other words, if we scale back, we can't be everywhere at once, and you have to kind of pick which continent you want to be breathing down the neck of. These are bad choices. They are also false economics. The, quote, savings from withdrawing from the Balkans, for example, will not free up anywhere near the magnitude of funds needed for military modernization or transformation. But these are false economies in other, more profound ways as well. The true cost of not meeting our defense requirements will be a lessened capacity for American global leadership, and ultimately the loss of a global security order that is uniquely friendly to American principles and prosperity. Why would you ever think that a global security order uniquely friendly to American principles and prosperity is a long-term sustainable expectation? Well, they thought it, and they thought that they could keep this up for a century if they just prioritized the military above all else. They make no cuts in the military, and they maintain a presence basically everywhere. But it continues, creating tomorrow's dominant force. And like I said, We need to go back to the Bush-Cheney administration because this is where so much of what's going on now got really laid down. This is where they poured the wet cement and wrote their names in it. It hardened, it's still there. So, yeah. To preserve American military preeminence in the coming decades, the Department of Defense must move more aggressively to experiment with new technologies and operational concepts and seek to exploit the emerging revolution in military affairs. Information technologies in particular are becoming more prevalent and significant components of modern military systems. Remember, broadband was really new at this point and not widely deployed yet. These information technologies are having the same kind of transforming effects on military affairs as they're having in the larger world. The effects of this military transformation will have profound implications for how wars are fought, what kinds of weapons will dominate the battlefield, and inevitably which nations enjoy military preeminence. The United States enjoys every prospect of leading this transformation. Indeed, it was the improvements in capabilities acquired during the American defense buildup of the 1980s that hinted at and then confirmed during Operation Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, that a revolution in military affairs was at hand. At the same time, the process of military transformation will present opportunities for America's adversaries to develop new capabilities that, in turn, will create new challenges for military preeminence. Moreover, the Pentagon, constrained by limited budgets, so that poor Pentagon and their limited budget, and pressing current missions, has seen funding for experimentation and transformation crowded out in recent years. Spending on military research and development has been reduced dramatically over the past decade. And again, why? Cold War over. People were like, yeah, wrap it up. And this guy's like, actually, we need more money. Okay, how are you going to sell that to people? Well, they explain in here. We'll get to that before the end. Spending on military research and development has been reduced dramatically over the past decade. Indeed, during the mid-1980s, when the Defense Department was in the midst of the Reagan buildup, which was primarily an effort to expand existing forces and field traditional weapons systems, research spending represented 20% of total Pentagon budgets. By contrast, today's research and development accounts for only 8% of defense spending. And even this reduced total is primarily for upgrades of current weapons. Without increased spending on basic research and development, the United States will be unable to exploit the RMA and preserve its technological edge on future battlefields. Any serious effort at transformation must occur within the larger framework of U.S. national security strategy, military missions, and defense budgets. The United States cannot simply declare a strategic pause while experimenting with new technologies and operational concepts, nor can it choose to pursue a transformation strategy that would decouple American and allied interests. A transformation strategy that solely pursued capabilities for projecting force from the United States, for example, and sacrificed forward basing and presence would be at odds with larger American policy goals and would trouble American allies. So they're like, we need to keep the bases everywhere, we need to project force from everywhere. Now, here's where it gets super interesting, and especially when you consider that this was late 2000. Further, the process of transformation. So talking about this big buildup of the military and refunding it and expanding it. The process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Wow, and so conveniently that happened as soon as this, all the people tied to this think tank became the government. Interesting. Domestic politics and industrial policy will shape the pace and content of transformation as much as the requirements of current missions. A decision to suspend or terminate aircraft carrier production, as recommended by this report and as justified by the clear direction of military technology, will cause great upheaval. So they talk about particular fighter things. But then going down to the bottom, one of the things that they recommend is they say, in general, to maintain American military preeminence that is consistent with the requirements of a strategy of American global leadership or dominance, tomorrow's U.S. armed forces must meet 3 new missions. 1, global missile defenses, a network against limited strikes capable of protecting the United States, its allies, and forward deployed forces must be constructed. This must be a layered system of land, sea, air, and space-based components. And then off of that. Control of space and cyberspace is the second principle. Much as control, had somebody in the comments actually trying to tell me, oh, they don't have people policing the internet. There are so many stories about this. I mean, here's laying out the call for it and the theoretical need, but you can find all kinds of things about, in the Obama years, it was Cass Sunstein was the person who was heading it. I forget the name of it, but yeah, they were putting people online to try to just bring online discussions more in line with the misleading and deceptive mainstream U.S. imperialist line on a variety of different political questions. Then you see more limited things, like the Democratic Party within its own interest does things like the Correct the Record PAC, which just pays to put people online to say what they want. But if you don't think you've never interacted with like a military or intelligence operative online, you are sadly mistaken. Anyway, control of space and cyberspace. Much as control of the high seas and the protection of the international commerce defined global powers in the past, so will control of the new international commons of cyberspace. That will be a key to world power in the future. America, incapable of protecting its interests or those of its allies, to space or the infosphere, term which never really caught on, will find it difficult to exert global political leadership. So you can see here that they were talking about the control of space and cyberspace before. They're also looking for a Pearl Harbor-like event to sell this. Otherwise, it might take a super long time. And the policy paper goes on. So again, I keep saying Bush and Cheney need to be discussed more. What happened during their 8 years that literally no one ever talks about really needs to be revisited. And there's so much there that is, I think, still creating a blind spot for people trying to understand what's going on now. All right, the one thing I am going to leave out today is the Henry Kissinger thing. Let me get back to the main screen here as we wrap up the chat and I come to the end of a 3-hour show. I'm glad we finally got to do Rebuilding America's Defenses. I often do stuff for September 11 because that, to me, was part of when I really started paying attention to politics and understanding what was going on the world stage, and eventually, became committed enough. I started studying Marxism, etc. Going back to that, I just can't. A lot of people, even somewhat older people who aren't in their 20s anymore, may not really remember the Bush-Cheney years. Gotta go, and it was before social media, so there was less kind of popular sharing of news pertaining to the hideous reactionary transformative things that the Bush-Cheney government was doing, but it absolutely laid the foundation that Obama and Trump and Biden have been building on. So anyway, where are we in the chat here? Let's catch up, and that'll be today's stream. A lot of people talking about what video games they like and if there are any good military games at all. Somebody says the only good military first-person shooter is Spec Ops: The Line. Definitely how a lot of fascists get their start is sharing, quote, edgy humor. Yeah, I knew somebody else that was into, quote, dark humor and falling down that rabbit hole through, like, quote, edgy or, quote, offensive memes. And they start out as teenagers just thinking, like, oh, I'm being edgy. I remember those times. I was 13, I was 15, I was 14. I remember those times. I feel like it was about 16 when I started, head came out of ass kind of thing. At least a little bit more. But yeah, I remember those times of being super immature. And I can't say I was ever really attracted to like racism and stuff like that. But I mean, I just remember that mentality of just like, something bad, I'm not supposed to do it. I feel like it was a bit more innocuous then. But it's like, well, literally military grade now. I mean, all the stuff that people are interacting with online is literally weaponized. And as communists, we're trying to counter some of that, but we definitely don't have $4.3 million to spend on it or whatever the Navy does. So yeah, I'll just say again, patreon.com/socialism for all. There we go. The YouTube channel Azeal, 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 I don't know, talks to a lot of veterans in VR chat, usually about how they were conned into enlisting, the horrors they saw, etc. By the way, if any veterans are listening, I want to hear your stories. I think that stories of that is usually one of the best counter recruitment tools. But yeah, let's talk about it, and let's talk about. I know that there's some people I correspond regularly with who are former U.S. military and have now become actual communists and see that they played a role in an evil system and they want to not give that system a future, and that's really admirable. You admitted that and you faced that and you're trying to make it better. I mean, not that you're going to reform the military. I mean, you're trying to make this overall situation better where that doesn't keep happening. Yeah, recruiting people who aren't equipped to realize what's happening. Literally people whose brains aren't formed yet. That's like the whole idea. Gotta love interdictions of adversaries. Absolutely. That's a standout phrase right there. I guess our moderators are here for the interdiction of trolls. I guess. So yeah, our moderators are troll interdictors or TIs. I'll start saying instead of tag a mod, because mod's 3 letters. Yeah, it's too long. Tag a TI. That's funny. Anyway, no, totally. So incursion comes from the word to incur. Does excursion come from the word to excur? Because no one uses that word ever. No, it's not a verb. You just get excursion. Okay, interesting. Oh, wait a minute. No. According to Wiktionary, the free dictionary, excur is a verb. To digress, to pass beyond limits, to go toward an extreme, or to take an excursion. But it is rare. It is rare. Just as you may have heard the word disgruntled. Gruntle is actually a word which means the opposite of disgruntled. It means to please. This sounds like wartime radio ads from the 40s saying the quiet part out loud. Someone's laughing at cheek malfunction. When you record speech for a living, you find all kinds of funny things that your face does. Seriously. Channel isn't showing up as being live. Don't know if this was mentioned already. Interesting. I mean, we got enough people for the chat. I'm good with that. Thank everybody for being here, as always. I had to go look it up to find the name for it again, but speaking of the military and space, has anyone ever heard of Project Orion? It was a planned nuclear pulse-propelled orbital space battleship with a shitload of nuclear warheads aboard. It was designed in the 50s and 60s, but never built. That we know of, someone adds. I actually have heard of that. I think, not by that name, but I've heard of that principle. And not a battleship, but just that you could propel a spaceship by nuclear blasts. But I think that would be... And again, I'm not a nuclear physicist or any kind of physicist, but I would think it would be hard to design a spacecraft that could withstand multiple nuclear blasts as its form of propulsion. Just even riding that shock wave. Although I guess you would only need, a small one to get started, and then because there's not friction in space, you would just keep going at a high speed. But I would think that if there were personnel aboard, the acceleration of you're going fast and then you go into nuclear speed, I don't know how you would survive that, but... Oh, and Project Orion was originally designed to be pointed at Earth. Wonderful. I watched the Dick Cheney biopic on a flight once. I felt sick to my stomach the entire time. It's the only appropriate response. Is that the one... Was that, what's his name? Christian Bale as Dick Cheney, I think? Yeah. Vice, 2018. That was the one with Christian Bale. He really did come out looking like Cheney, honestly. Yeah, that's feeling sick to your stomach is how most people feel when having to digest information related to Dick Cheney. It's repulsive, and again, no one wants to think about it. But we're on a quest here to bring back, force people to process that, because I feel like it's going to lead to some solutions. Niger also pushed out the U.S. military. Yeah, so that was, yeah, exactly. That was part of the counterterrorism stuff that the U.S. was Yeah, don't worry about the automod censoring that. That's fine. We did cover that a while back. I'm getting too tired to even like comment on that, but yeah, you're correct. Spec Ops: The Line is a retelling of the book Heart of Darkness, which Apocalypse Now, the movie, is also based on. I have read Heart of Darkness, so yeah, absolutely. And actually, Apocalypse Now is an updating of the story in Heart of Darkness, not originally about Vietnam, but Apocalypse Now is an updating of it. Okay, thank you, Mayor McCheese, doing your part by always sharing fries. Dictors for short. Yes, I find this information whelming also. Yeah, was it what that was in a movie, wasn't it? Where it was like you can be underwhelmed and overwhelmed. Can you ever just be whelmed? Nice. It's just how arbitrary it all can be. All right, that is the end of the chat for today. I want to thank the all the folks who showed up in the chat over the course of the stream, helped to make it what it was, and thanks also to the people who are watching this after the fact on YouTube or Patreon, Spotify, listening on SoundCloud, watching on Substack, or wherever else you may be watching this in the future. And we will see you in the next video.